Westports is a proud advocate of ESG practices supporting sustainable development goals and has been recognized as one of 8 global green ports in the Asia Pacific by APSN Greenport. Westports is also known as a garden port, and we have planted over 10,000 mangrove trees, showcasing a dedication to sustainability beyond mere aesthetics. We are proud of our fully Malaysian yet extremely diverse workforce of nearly 6,000 employees, including a strong contingent of women in operations, all playing a vital role in our success.
Welcome back, everyone. We appreciate you sticking with us through our short break and sponsor message. Your time is valuable, so let's make the most of the next session starting now. Next, we explore innovation and the energy transition. We are joined by Devrim Celal, the award-winning entrepreneur and Chief Flexibility and Marketing Officer at Kraken, the world's most advanced operating system for utilities. Devrim manages Kraken's global flexibility product and co-founded the Mercury Consortium, a global alliance setting the benchmark for advanced certification in distributed energy. Datin Seri Sunita, the founder of CGM, will moderate the discussion. Please welcome Devrim Celal and Datin Seri Sunita.
Thank you so much, Naja. So I am delighted today to be moderating Devrim. I'm so pleased that you could join us. Before we get started, I just want to do a very quick introduction about Octopus Energy, which some of the members of the audience might not know about. It started in 2016 as a green energy retailer, and now it is the #1 resale energy company in the UK with 11,000 staff. The management team speak to customers every single day. They started out with smart meters, encouraging behind-the-meter energy efficiencies. And the success of Octopus Energy is Kraken, the software. And the software company now serves companies with some 75 million customers around the world, annual recurring revenue of 500 million. It could be valued at 15 billion US as a standalone entity, a decacorn, more than 10 billion US. So Devrim, today, firstly, tell us about the business model. How do we change the massive inertia of legacy infrastructure? Are consumers ready? And back to the legacy infra. This is the 4 questions that I'm going to ask you, but let's start with the first question first. Tell us about the industry model, because we recognize the energy industry is facing multiple paradigm shifts. We used to favor energy-dense feedstock, and now we want carbon-light feedstock. We started off by assuming there's going to be insatiable energy demand, energy expansion. How are we going to manage this? And your business model is premised on behind-the-meter efficiencies led by consumer preferences. Why and how has Kraken been so wildly popular with its consumers? Over to you, Devrim.
Thank you, Sunita, and good morning from a uncharacteristically sunny September morning in London. Two disclaimers before I get on. First, the 15 billion number is journalists making. We've had no public statements to the markets. And second, there's this question always asked, what came first, Kraken or Octopus? And interestingly, it was Kraken. Except when we shopped Kraken around to utilities saying, we've got this idea of a new operating system for a utility, what do you think? Some said, no, thank you. We've already got ourselves very well covered. And the rest of them said, what a brilliant idea, but who's going to go first? So we had to establish Octopus Energy as the demo client to Kraken. That experiment now became the largest utility in the UK and serves over 11 million customers around the world. But going back to Kraken, I'm going to share a few slides, but hopefully make this talkative more than anything else. Bear with me. And as it so happens, it's the first time I use
While you're getting yourself organized, let me remind the audience that one of Devrim's quotes, because I've done a lot of research on him and what Kraken and Octopus are saying, one of the most powerful quotes I found is him saying that energy transition will not succeed unless the customer is involved. And for every purchasing decision that we make, if there's a deal where we may change what we buy, how we buy, and if you give customers the choice and you treat them well, you have their best interest in heart, that's when you're going to start building trust. And once you have that trust, you get a lot further in getting them to willingly participate in the energy transition. But Devrim, back to you again.
Apologies about that. Zoom used to be our preferred method, but we're a Google shop now, so it's the first time I use Zoom sharing in a while. But thank you for that. That sounded like a perfect filler. But look, to be able to do the things we do, a critical element is that we actually don't have any financial targets in our mission statements. We try to set up societal goals ahead as first and believe in if we chase these big goals, then financial ones follow through. So we say we're going to use technology that's going to unlock the new energy, the energy system of the future, and we're going to be improving 1 billion lives within the next decade. And that gives us a lot of freedom. But if we look at what we mean by that, in the old energy world, simple systems, few generation points, centrally located, all of them very controllable, literally with a lever through fax machines or phone calls. The new world, everything is changing. We got bidirectional energy. You've got millions of generation points. It's intermittent. It works when there's sun and wind and not otherwise. It creates volatility. The generation points actually have increased 500 times since 2010 because every rooftop solar is a new generation point, and that's global numbers. Low carbon consumer devices, what we mean by that is electric vehicles, heat pumps, batteries, rooftop solar, smart thermostats, will all grow by 5 times by the end of this decade alone. These are all connected to the edges of our distribution grid, where operators usually don't have good visibility. And this completely new thing that we didn't talk about 2 years ago, data center loads will double by the end of the same decade as well. It was always expected to grow, but with the AI boom, it's growing at a significant pace. Now, Sunita, you talked about inertia. One of the biggest challenges I'm talking here about regulatory market structure, organizational inertia of a system that has worked extremely well for over 100 years because it's a critical system. It was governed with strict rules. But now the biggest bottleneck to this change is becoming the technology systems that the industry have come to rely on. They're legacy, they're old, they have not been built with the future in mind, and often they're not systems built for the utility industry. They were built for automotive, for chemicals, and then applied to electricity, gas, water, telco. And we've seen many failures over the course of the last few years when we didn't change them, but also when utilities tried to change their systems. And that's when we started conceived Kraken as an operating system, because our belief was we can use analogies from other industries, Android, iOS, Windows, macOS, where there is an operating system under the hood. It means absolutely nothing to users like me and maybe some of you, unless you're software engineers. The operating system is useless. You need applications on top. But what that provides is a core set of services, connectivities, methodologies that make it easier to write software effectively on top of that's shareable. So Kraken, on top of its operating system, has two families of products. It's got the customer management. That's everything our utility clients use to manage their relationship with their end consumer. So traditional terms, customer relationship management, billing, meter data flows, and all forms of user interaction. And the new set of products are optimization products. It's things that you need to monitor and control to deliver the new energy system. So optimizing charging of EVs or batteries, optimizing operation of gas engines so they can back up and allow renewables to run more effectively. And finally, like every operating system, it has to be open. If our clients have tools that they already use, they should be able to use that on top of the Kraken operating system. And we've got many examples of that now going live. One thing I would like to mention is a little bit geeky and detailed. It's that term there, CI/CD. That's continuous integration, continuous development every 10 minutes. Now, a lot of you would know, and especially if you were using software in early 2000s, 90s, that updates come once every year or even once every few years, but more recently once a quarter. And every time there's a new update, it's a massive headache because you have to update a lot of things, watch it overnight to make sure it works. And if it doesn't work, everything collapses. In Kraken, we have a completely different philosophy, modern architecture. We actually release code every 10 minutes. So during this conversation, Kraken would have been updated 6 times everywhere in the world. And those changes are tiny, so it de-risks everything. Because if something goes wrong, you can roll it back. Now, the question I get is, how do your customers know the changes happen? Think about this. How often a mobile app on your phone gets updated and how many times you get notification about it? Often, never. And changes are so intuitive that customers naturally adapt to it without need for these major training programs. Now, the key to the success of what we do is replacing multiple systems. Because the difficulty is utilities grew over time, and as they grew, they created departments. They've got onboarding, address change, billing, issue resolution, debt collection, and department after department. Each one of those has a different software stack with a different data set, which makes any change so complex. Now, I actually had my first exposure to utilities in mid-90s in the UK when the markets were deregulating. Then I left, I came back 10 years ago, and I looked and said, oh, not much has changed. All the changes we talked about have been implemented. That's great. In the last 10 years, incredible amounts have changed. And if you have a tech stack that has over 30 systems to do a basic function, then adapting to change is that really hard, which is why we architected Kraken the way it is. The other challenge we had to adapt is our clients want that y-axis, resilient, reliable, secure, industrial, like NASA. Things need to go and land and come back safely. But they also want consumer love, that emotional part, the concept, the meta concept of move fast, break things, keep going fast, which utilities can't live in. That's not the world they can exist. So our job is to find that top right quadrant, make everything utility grade that's able to give that customer love, but without breaking the system down. And the core to managing all of this is data. In old days, data was thought about once an hour. Something changed once an hour. You built once an hour, and depending on geography, half an hour or longer periods. That model doesn't work anymore. In Kraken, we collect data from consumers every hour still, from consumer devices once every 10 seconds, and for very large scale generation devices, 20 times a second. And when we monitor the grid, we collect data 52,000 times a second. And that gives us both the breadth of data, which is critical for AI, the depth of data, the number of times we collect new and relevant data sets, and actionable real-time feedback loops, which will be core to the way we think and manage the system in the future. Already using that infrastructure, 1 million of the messages that go from Kraken through various utilities around the world, from Origin, Tokyo Gas, to National Grid in the US soon. We just signed that one, but EDF, E.ON, major utilities. They send messages customers. 1 million of those today is AI generated. Now, one of the most interesting 2 parameters on that one, they achieve 20% more satisfaction than human generated messages. And one thing they do really well is empathy, because AI is never tired, they don't have a bad day, and they get context much quicker and better than humans. We optimize today over 300,000 devices. I'll come back to it a little bit later what that means, but these are electric vehicles charged at times when renewables are abundant and network is available. And we're increasingly using different models to help utilities with one of the biggest issues they're facing, especially through economic crisis in different parts of the world, is debt collection. And identifying particularly fraudulent behavior. Now, all that was background. We've had an incredible journey. We've only been licensing Kraken since 2019 outside of Octopus. That was Good Energy, a small, brilliant green utility in the UK. Today, we've just exceeded 70 million accounts on Kraken. That's individual consumer details that utilities manage through Kraken. And we're live over 10 countries around the world. And we've been recognized across everything we do, both by leading analysts like Frost and Guidehouse as leader in our domain. And one of the most interesting things that led to the speculative $15 billion valuation was large organizations like NASDAQ actually recognize us and give their space for us to use for launching new products and relationships. And this was further from an event where we announced our first major US win, an integrated utility, National Grid.
This is so impressive, Devrim. Thank you so much for that very quick overview. I think we recognize this is a once in a multi-generation opportunity to reset the industrial base, but we are looking at highly centralized industries. Often they are monopolies. Kraken has already creamed off the market competitive industries, and now you're going to the more regulated sectors. So you can see, especially when the grid is not independent, where regulations don't fully support or even encourage unidirectional energy supply to be bidirectional. And on the other hand, Kraken needs markets to be ready. You need the regulations to be in place. You need the consumers to understand the benefits. We want to run a grid with a high percentage of renewable energy reliably, and we need energy sector flexibility, which you will explain to us. How are we going to change this massive inertia, Devrim?
Okay. I'm going to take a step back and tell you guys a story from a very different time and a very different industry. And I'm going to draw some parallels and show you how I'm hopeful that utility industry is about to go into a massive acceleration. So a little photo. This is New York City, Fifth Avenue, Easter Day Parade in 1900. Now, when you look at the photo, surprise, it's cars, horse carts everywhere. Not many cars in those days. And it was interesting. Let me take one more step. So all horse carts, with the exception of this one, actually it might have been electric. First cars were electric, but first traditional car, as we call it today. And everyone in that audience would have thought, what an idiot. He replaced or she replaced a horse which would procreate. All it needed some hay and water, and it created more horses and bought something that needed service and maintenance, expensive gasoline, which you couldn't get anywhere, and wouldn't go as fast as a horse. And nobody thought in those days that cars would actually succeed. In fact, Ford himself said, if you ask people in horse cars what would be a better form of transport, they would have said a faster horse. Yet, 13 years later, 2013, Easter Day Parade, Fifth Avenue, New York, and not a horse inside. 13 years, 125 years ago, something happened that ended up with an incredibly fast change in the transportation industry. And I think we are at a similar inflection point in energy today. Some evidence. 2023, we as consumers spent $184 billion in low carbon technologies around the world. That was 2 times governments combined. 1 in 4 cars in the US sold will be EVs or hybrids. China, 40% of cars sold are electric today. And the trigger to that change was EVs have been the cheaper car to run for a long time. Now they are the cheaper car to buy, and they're a better vehicle. Half the solar installations in California last year had a battery attached. It was resiliency, security, reliability for the individual. So there's a new form or new forms of achieving the energy trilemma using basic consumer technologies. The growth in large-scale batteries is 9x since 2020 in the last 5 years. And the cost of batteries dropped dramatically. They dropped from $300 to $400 per kilowatt hour to some recent news coming out of the Gulf area, Saudi Arabia signing contracts for $78 per kilowatt hour. Major transitional shifts. Last year, 90% of all energy production investments were renewable. That gives me hope. And what I've said it slightly before, us as consumers will be a major driving force because we're buying EVs, solar, heat pumps, air conditioning, electrifying heating and transportation at a rate that has not been seen before. And what's even more interesting is this very difficult to read graph. But what it basically says is blue line is actual installations of solar. The white lines were the analyst estimates at the starting point. And what you immediately see is analysts are always conservative. They have these flat lines of where things will go. The reality is overshooting analyst estimates by 3 times. So 200 million could be 600 million. But there's a risk at managing this rate of growth. So I'm going to go back and draw some parallels of how we deal with that and do a comparison between energy and transport. And I've done this presentation in different parts of the world, so I try to draw some Malaysian parallels to it. And I looked at when was the first train station in Malaysia? And I discovered, with help from ChatGPT, that it was 1894, Taiping Perak. Now, in London, where I am today, it would have been the Greenwich train station or Metropolitan line. In New York, it was Grand Central, all roughly the same times, between 1850 and 1900. And then I looked at the first power generation, electricity generation, and it was a generator, same year, at a mining station in Malaysia. UK would have been the Edison power generator at Farringdon, and New York was the Pearl Street station, roughly the same time. So the two industries actually went through their last transformation at the same time. Then our industries work very similar topographically. Electricity, we have big transmission lines. Transport have their motorways, highways, interstates, depending on where in the world you are. And then we have our urban roads. Sorry, we have our distribution lines, whether they are underground or poles in our streets, or transport has their urban roads. We suffer from the same problems: congestion, affordability, health, sustainability, both industries. Yet, transportation is significantly ahead of us. They are transmission layer, their highways have exceptional telemetry. They can do real-time signaling saying, you've got congestion coming up, you may want to get out the highway here and have a detour. They use pricing discrimination to create congestion areas within cities where you pay more to enter at certain times. That changes driver behavior. London realized significant reduction in carbon emissions when we introduced the congestion zone and significant increase in public transport use. But the real change in transport started with the mobile era. And one of the big changes was the digital map. Now, some of you may know this. The first digital maps weren't Google Maps. It was, in fact, MapQuest. They came up, they got the public paper-based maps and put them online. The difference that Google brought to this was user-generated content. They took your mobile, my mobile, anyone using a Google Map app, received the location data, and they gave us something back. They said there's an amazing coffee shop nearby. Here's a good uh, um, resting place, whatever. Uh, but they also use that same data to design congestion maps, because if they see how we're moving and how many of us are moving at what speed, it gives a sense of how congested the roads were. And they gave us navigational tools. So it was a give and take. And that's become incredibly successful. Launched in 2005, hit 1 billion users in 12, and today 2 billion people around the world use Google Maps. It became ubiquitous. And I'm going to tout the Kraken horn here a little bit, apologies, but just read this as general of what the industry can do. We believe if we connect everything, we can get to the same level of telemetry for networks. Because we're currently seeing this incredible proliferation of new makes and models of cars, thermostats, batteries, you name it. A lot of it coming out of China. And every single one of them with a different protocol, different behavior that makes it hard for utilities to connect and make good use of these devices to build a more affordable and resilient system. To enable that, we have set up a technology center in Manchester, which brings in together all the major names in the OEM industry and all our Kraken clients to actually work together and figure out what does it mean to connect an EV to the grid? How could that be a force for good as opposed to something that creates additional burden on that grid? And this has been running for a couple of years with incredible achievements so far. Not Kraken achievements, but achievements between automotive, heating, cooling industries, and utilities. So if any of you is ever in the UK is interested, please come and visit us.
Thank
The
you.
second thing is we kicked off something called the Bluetooth of Energy, Mercury Consortium, which sets to establish very similar standards to Bluetooth, which was set up by Ericsson and became an industry initiative on how devices communicated and is so successful today. You and I don't think if our little headset will work with our mobile if they both have the Bluetooth logo. In fact, 10 million Bluetooth enabled devices will be sold today alone. We want to create the same so when consumers buy these devices, or when utilities encourage their consumers to buy these devices, they know exactly what they're getting in terms of grid support.
This is a good segue, Devrim, to consumers, because I think you've given us a big picture view why legacy infrastructure should pivot, it's inevitable, etc. Kraken is now live in, you had mentioned 10
It's
countries, 12
using different
countries?
components. Yes,
Okay,
so
all
it
right.
goes
So
growing very fast.
okay, so I mean, from the article, I think some articles it's 12 mainly competitive markets, and this includes France's EDF, Germany's E.ON, also Australia's Origin Energy, Japan's Tokyo Gas, and of course, your very recent congratulations, National Grid, 6 million customers, New York and Massachusetts. And we know that customers are using devices and vehicles, and they can now decide. It's no longer just the utilities that decides what happens on the grid. As a matter of fact, utilities very often don't have any visibility at a substation level downwards, right? So the
Correct.
disintermediation of the generation, whether or not the grid is independent, and some such interesting ideas, potential homeowners in the UK were offered the chance to pay nothing on their energy bills for at least 10 years.
Yes.
Your relationship with the Chinese EV giant to lease a car so that customers just pay for energy at the prices based on market demand. So tell me, how are you delighting customers?
So the two examples are actually quite interesting because zero bill homes starts with the assumption that we work with sustainable developers where we size the rooftop solar, the battery, the heat pump, the EV charger, and in exchange, Octopus Energy guarantees a decade of no energy bills, and there won't be any gas in those homes. So no energy bills guaranteed, which has a significant increase in the value of the house. The second proposal with the Chinese manufacturer is a vehicle to grid enabled car, so it can charge but discharge back to the grid. It's a a lease that includes the lease payment, insurance, EV charger, and electricity for as long as the driver doesn't drive more than 10,000 miles a year for £299, which is again transformational because suddenly makes EV ownership cheaper than owning any other form of transport. Now, delighting customers, absolutely critical because if they're going to own 200 million things that connect to the edge of the grid, the utility should have at least visibility and ideally some control over how they behave. But you need to earn that. That doesn't come for free. It doesn't come naturally because you're saying to someone, let me decide when to charge your car. And they're saying, wait a minute, I got to get to work tomorrow morning. I may need it for emergency. And that hesitation can only be surpassed by trust. And trust comes by delighting customers by having their best interests at heart. So you got to do two things incredibly well. Amazing first impression. You got to get things done right. And you have to give them offers they can't refuse and repeat that. So it earns trust. So I'm going to give you a use case of a customer, and this customer could be anywhere in the world. It could be any utility using Kraken that says, I would like to have an EV charger at my home. And they do this without talking to anyone. They just go to the website and click that button that says book your EV charger appointment. And they immediately get a table. Now, by the time you got this calendar view, the system would have said, I know this customer, I know where they live because I have all that data. I have an idea of their home. Based on that, which technician is qualified to do this and who's the closest one to this person. And that's how this calendar view has been populated. So it's not random. The customer chooses any one of those times. And at that moment, the technician would have received a message saying you've got this new job at this home and this is what you should expect. And the customer received the details of the technician is going to go, and they will both have tools to monitor each other's progress so there are no surprises. It's a bit like Amazon giving you warning and saying we're going to arrive at your home in an hour's time. And also all the tools the technician would need to record what they did so the next technician would have access to perfect information. Now, but the thing here is the utility has a valuable piece of information. That customer has an EV. So they have the ability to give them an offer that meets what they're looking for. And if I'm an EV owner, I need cheap range when I need it. I don't want to think about electricity prices. So the tool there is an app that's not too dissimilar to the concept of a Google Map, because Google Maps is successful because it's simple to use. You don't have to click at a lot of things. In this case, the customer say to the customer, here's an incredible proposition for you that you can't refuse. Sign up and you will get cheap range. So they use a mobile app, typically 4 to 8 screens maximum. In this one, they're saying screen 1, I've got an electric vehicle. Screen 2, it's a Tesla Model 3 and I've got a generic 7 kilowatt charger. And then we ask the customer something that utilities often don't. What would you like to have? And the customer on the first screen tells us, charge it 100% by 7:30 tomorrow morning. Now, that could have been 80%, could have been 5 a.m. It doesn't matter. But as soon as we have that input, we look at when is electricity greenest, most abundant, or we have oversupply of electricity, and when is the grid available? And based on those three parameters, consumer ask, generation mix, grid status, we come up with a schedule, which is what you see there. It will charge 10 to 11 p.m. and then 12:30 till 6 a.m. And the customer has perfect information what will actually happen. Now, that could change, but for as long as you keep the customer up to date, they're quite happy to go along with the journey. And this program has been running since 2022 January. I remember we kicked off with 811 Tesla customers. It is the largest, what we call virtual power plant. I don't like the term, but it describes something. It's a power plant made up of lots of other devices behaving in harmonious way. Bit like a group of birds that have that mesmerizing move in the sky in autumn, or a school of fish. that they move in harmony and make themselves look like something bigger than they are. That's what a VPP is. 750,000 individual devices, 6.2 gigawatts of dispatchable power. Now, it depends on the average size of a nuclear power plant you like to pick, but UK, they're typically 2 gigawatts, so 2 nuclear power plants worth of power that can be rapidly turned up or down. 15 billion packets of data. Remember, I talked about the breadth of data and the depth are quite important. 15 billion packets every single day. 20% productivity gains on field operations. So those technicians, if you pick the right one closest to where they need to do their work, you can reduce their driving time. And as a result of all of this, we're saving 1.4 million tons of CO2 emissions, which otherwise would have been emitted through driving or running gas and coal power plants to balance the energy system.
This is so impressive. I'm sure this is why we don't have any questions from the floor yet, because everyone's jaws must be just on the floor right now while they're wondering how is this happening and when is it going to arrive in this part of the world? Do you think you can just walk us through how are we going to start digitizing networks in this part of the world? And sorry, before we get to that, some questions on customer satisfaction.
Sure.
The management team speaks to customers every single day, right? I mean, I think that's just incredible. Everyone in the organization takes calls from customers. Can you just walk us through that? This is at Octopus Energy.
So Octopus Energy, so our clients,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
it's really so when we implement Kraken at our clients, it is not just a software as a service license they sign up to. The first thing we do is a transformation project. We transform those utilities, which I said were quite departmentalized, into a single entity. A universal agent model is what we call it, so that any call that comes into someone can be answered by that person and that person alone. In fact, I say this half jokingly, but it's true. At Octopus Energy, their telephones do not have a transfer button because the person receiving it is supposed to solve the issue that they've received in almost every single case. So no exceptions, no back office. That allows the utility to achieve incredible efficiencies because a single person could do a lot more. Typically, Kraken customers reduce their cost to serve by 40%. The other way to look at it is traditionally, industry uses one customer service representative to service 1,000 to 1,500 customers. With Kraken, we're able to achieve 1 to 5,000, with the exception of Japan, where we're hitting 1 to 10,000, but there's some cultural elements where Japanese people call their utility a lot less than they would in other geographies. The second thing we achieve is customer satisfaction. And we've seen cases where satisfaction has grown by 3 times. One example is E.ON in the UK, where when they migrated from their legacy systems to Kraken, satisfaction ratings went from 1.1, 1.2 to 4.4 by the end of the migration was completed. Because when you can resolve people issues very quickly and you can use clever tools like the AI I described earlier, they're happier for that. The third one, which is the dearest to my heart and the one that's sometimes overlooked but is critical, is employee satisfaction. When we implement Kraken at a utility side, we also implement tools to measure employee satisfaction continuously. And there's immediately a significant increase once people start working on Kraken because they resolve issues. And I remember a while back, I was taking a client through one of our customers, a prospective client, through a customer site. And we had this amazing tour. Everyone was happy, singing praises. And as we're walking through the customer service floor, this lady jumped up and said, "Can I talk to them?" And I thought, oh God, this is where it's going to go all wrong. And she jumped up and said, "I've been working here for 25 years. I've never been happier in my life." And I think that says a lot about how Kraken transforms not only the customer experience economics, but also the lives of the employees of the utility. In fact, in the UK, the Times, which is our major broadsheet newspaper publishes best workplaces to work at. And they use different categories. And in the large business category, Kraken had 3 customers in the top 10: Octopus Energy, EDF, and E.ON. So I think to achieve some of the things we do, you need all that DNA built into the utility that drives behavior like talking continues to the customers. For example, when we do migrations, we call Kraken has to be CEO proof. A CEO should be able to use it. So often the first people trained to use Kraken are the C-suite, and they're required to service customers because if they can, then the rest of the team will just follow through.
Wow, this is so impressive. You know what? I
Thank
was
you.
mistaken. There are 2 questions. And before we get on to digitization of the grid, maybe you might want to weave the answers in to the next
Sure,
part
of
of your
course.
presentation, which is so the first question is really about geopolitical tensions right now. You've got certain large countries poo-pooing the idea of a climate crisis, although it's science-based how and a pullback on ESG, obviously. But I understand your focus is on the consumer. If the consumer is happy, if the consumer is saving money, if we're already at the levelized cost of electricity or lower, et cetera, et cetera. So, but there's a question, how are we going to manage this in the face of geopolitical tensions? And the next question is exactly what you're going to be answering in your next set of slides. What are the critical policy or regulatory changes needed in Southeast Asia to enable wide-scale deployment of virtual power plants and energy flexibility services? And then finally, something a bit more philosophical. Why does it sound like integration is the end of capitalism? Okay, so off you go, Devrim.
Interesting.
You will
I
have
would
the
like to
answers
come
to
back to
all
that
of
last one
this.
again.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
so there are some realities to the energy transition. I believe the number is 80% of all solar related equipment was manufactured in China last year. There are some economic realities as well. I heard this, I was at New York Climate Week last week, and I heard this uh, shared on a fairly serious presentation, so I'm going to quote it, that in certain parts of the world, it's cheaper to use a solar panel to build a garden fence than wood. So the economics now make sense. You don't need regulatory environments or regulatory subsidies, governmental subsidies to enable renewable energy. The second thing that is very important, this new surge in demand as a result of, or I would say new perceived surge to come as a result of AI training and inferring data centers, crypto mining data centers. I think it's reality, but I don't think it's going to be as big as the what is hyped at the moment. But regardless, it will require significant power very, very quickly. We already know that the lead times for turbines is over 5 years. In some cases, we're talking a decade. So the solution isn't going to come from burning gas or burning anything for that matter. It is not going to come from nuclear in the short term because we know how long nuclear takes anywhere in the world. The fastest route to power is solar. And for that, the geopolitical solution needs to come through. The other solutions that governments are following, particularly US, is extending life of existing generation. And that's quite brutally gas, coal, nuclear, whatever they can find. But it is very hard to bring back to life an old coal plant, especially because the technicians who know how to run them are reducing in number. So geopolitical situation will change and shift, but the reality of it is if we were to overcome this need, this hunger for power, solar is going to be solar and batteries are going to be the fastest routes to that solution. I'll give you an incredible data set. UAE in Abu Dhabi is about to launch a giga scale data center. It's going to be 100% powered by solar and battery. Their cost to run is going to be 6 cents per kilowatt hour. that's cheaper than electricity in almost every part of the world, electricity to consumers in that case. So we can achieve incredible economics that will enable us to manage this transition using green energy because we don't have an alternative. The second
Very
question
impressive.
around digitizing networks. Let me share a
Mm.
couple of slides and I'll bring us back to
Thank
our
you. Thank you.
sort of um, Google Maps analogy. So
Okay.
before we go into that, 5% is the visibility we have today into the lowest level of the distribution network. That's what we call the low voltage. That's at our street level. And these networks were typically built in 1950s, 60s. They were designed with the philosophy of they had to handle the absolute worst case scenario, the peak, the one peak we would need during the day, which in the UK, if you guys follow football, is the Football Association Cup, FA Cup halftime, when everyone just goes to the kitchen to brew a cup of tea and flicks on their kettles. We have this massive spike that we have standby power to generate, but the distribution networks are designed for that one or two or 10 extreme cases throughout the year. And it's an engineering marvel that they work so well so far. But when you install 200 million additional equipment from 5 to 10 kilowatts, drawing power 5 to 10 kilowatts, or in some cases, generating that power and pushing it back into the grid, 5% visibility is not acceptable. And also, 5% visibility also infers another one, that utilization is low. Now, I didn't have time to look into what it is in Malaysia, but I'll give you the European example. It's between 2 to 20%. So networks are used 2 to 20% of the time. So 80 to 98% of the time, the capacity is idle. UK average is 16%. US in some states is a little bit higher, closer to 40%. But again, overall efficiency quite low. Now, DERs are incredible. I said we receive 15 billion packets of data from them. We know where they are. We know what they're doing. We know which part of the network they're connected to. And that data allows us to start modeling congestion or available capacity in real time at regional level, at primary substations. So that's one level up. Those are the big sort of centers you see with transmission cables, high transmission wires coming down to distribution level, and then feeders. That's at our street level, the cabinets or sometimes on poles. You could get precision view of what's happening at that moment in time at that part of the network. You can use that data to forecast behavior. What will it be tomorrow, a week from now, at that moment in time, at that position in the network? And it's quite interesting. I often hear, can we trust consumer behavior as a tool for moderating the grid, for managing the grid? And I say, absolutely yes, because statistics is your friend when you're dealing with consumers, because there's hundreds of thousands of them. There's a lot of historical data, so you can forecast and predict their behavior. And in these models, our predictions 24 hours ahead are over 90% accurate. And I'll take a lot of credit for that, but the reality of it is our behavior is fairly predictable. And using that, we can build models of how the grid is operating, and then we can take those models, take the consumer preference, what the consumer asked us to do for their car, charge it 80% by 7 a.m., or use my battery in this way, or heat or cool my home at these times. We can take data from the residential field, meter data, in real time, or even often if it's delayed, it's okay. We can take the grid data that I just described, that we can build using the data from low carbon devices. Generation data on the grid could be solar, wind, coal, gas, nuclear, it doesn't matter. But if we can bring all of this into one model or a collection of models that communicate, suddenly we can use all the modern tools that we have at our use today to optimize the grids. So we're getting more than 15% utilization out of the distribution network. So we are not curtailing solar and wind. In the UK, for example, so far this year, we've spent over £1 billion turning down wind generation. If we had a better optimized system and regulatory environment, we could have monetized that by incentivizing users simply to use more electricity when there was abundance of it. We need to bring that consumer behavior, which supermarkets discovered ages ago when they have multiple promotions when you go in, and change our behavior. Instead of buying plum tomatoes, buy larger tomatoes because it's cheaper and there's an offer. We need to bring the same kind of mentality into energy system. And once we achieve that, the problems that we're perceiving with this change suddenly become beautiful solutions.
I love that. I love that. Devrim, I wanted to ask you, so there are a few paradigm shifts that we're seeing here. What I really like, and I heard this in one of Greg Jackson's interviews, that in the 2000s, the UK had about 3,800 generating points, but these were mainly owned by big corporates. And now
Correct.
you've got over 1 million generation points, EVs and other battery form of devices, solar, you're now independent generators. And especially now, we heard earlier this morning from Bloomberg NEF speaker Ali Nizadi that also the levelized cost of electricity, the marginal cost, and so on and so forth, everything is just overwhelmingly in favor of renewable energies. So the software solution, or SAS, seems to be the way to not just bring on board millions of generating devices, but also to be able to support consumers in making better uh, choices about how, when they're paying for their electricity, how to be far more energy efficient, and so on and so forth. For this part of the world, in the Asia Pacific, how would you summarize this to the regulators, the policymakers, the utility companies who would be listening into a conversation like this? What is needed?
So Malaysia already has some great published and committed targets for climate change, for decarbonization. To achieve those, you're going through a journey to decarbonize your energy generation. You have hydro, you're blessed with that, but bringing solar and wind into the picture as well. The consumer side of the equation happens naturally. You have about 5% of cars sold in Malaysia today, 45% electric. What we've seen in different parts of the world is there's a critical point that as you approach 20%, you go into an exponential curve. So you're not that far off, especially the cost of cars coming down significantly in the recent years, especially the last 2 years. Once all of that happens, things will move into a much faster motion that will happen oftentimes without the total control of regulators. The opportunity for regulators today is to start looking at places where it happened before and actually leapfrog, learn from the things that didn't happen so well to leapfrog and land on a stronger footing. Because the key to doing so one of the things we talk about is energy transition shouldn't happen to people, it should happen for the people. Therefore, it needs to be cheaper. Levelized cost of energy from renewables in almost everywhere in the world is lower than fossil fuel generated electricity, and it's going down. The cost of electricity from solar was around $300 per megawatt hour 10 years ago. Today, it's free in certain parts of the world and going down. The example I gave, firm solar 6 cents per kilowatt hour, is a pretty good indication of the direction of travel. There's a
Devrim, could you
sense,
just touch on energy sector flexibility as well?
of course, so it's a big topic, but
Sorry.
the way I think about it is energy sector had flexibility traditionally in generation because we could crank up gas up and down to match supply and demand in real time, and that's what we have to do. Energy is a just-in-time delivery system. We can't store it at scale, and surplus or shortage are equally bad. So, but as we replace gas, particularly with solar and wind, we lose the generation flexibility. Therefore, we need to create demand side flexibility, and we need to build that in a number of ways. One is behavioral, so incentivize customers to use electricity at different times, and price signals, sometimes emotional signals of renewable generation go a long way. But ultimately, we want to completely automate that. Like the example I shared is tell me what you need, let me decide for you, and I will give you an amazing offer. Those kind of dynamic propositions is where we need to get, because things will change. What we forecasted 24 hours ago for now will be different when the time gets closer, and we need that flexibility to change when a car is going to charge by half an hour, which will have no significant impact to the owner, but massive benefit to the grid system.
Yeah, I love that. I really love that idea. I'm looking forward to unpacking this a little bit more with Kraken and with other case studies around the world. Perhaps sometime next year. It'll be great if we could get this part of the region to understand better what the opportunities, efficiencies, cost savings are. I still remember such an interesting story that Greg Jackson, also an excellent communicator, just like you, and he was saying, when I try to explain this, I pretend I'm talking to my mother. So if in the depths of winter, you know that at 6 o'clock everybody comes back home, they start cooking, they do the laundry, all the electricity peak, your FA cup analogy, right? And he said, but if I could communicate to my mom and say, could you start at 8 or 9 o'clock and you would save money or it'd be free or whatever, she would immediately say, yeah, why not? Right? So
Absolutely.
this is a
And
challenge. We're not able to communicate with the consumers right now.
correct. So, one thing we tried out was, I'm not sure if the term NIMBYism resonates in Malaysia. Stands for not in my backyard. It's a
For
concept that
nuclear, yes.
people don't like any kind of generation, but particularly renewables close to their homes. They loved having them, but not in my backyard. So we bought 2 wind turbines, existing ones, in rural areas, and said to people, these are your wind turbines. If you subscribe to them, you will get a discount when they turn. And if they turn faster, you'll get a bigger discount. And we called this
Brilliant.
proposition the fan club. So these are your fans. Based on their spinning, you'll get a discount.
Yeah.
They were oversubscribed immediately. So we went about and asked communities across United Kingdom, would you like to have a wind turbine in your backyard? We had over 30,000 communities saying, yes, please. And then we said to
Brilliant.
landowners,
Brilliant.
can we build a wind turbine? And you start matching supply and demand regionally, which is where energy needs to go. It has to become more regionalized. Otherwise, we're going to keep building this massive infrastructure that we
Okay.
rarely use.
So this is what
And
we're
fan
also
club is a
seeing here,
perfect example.
zonal tariffs, right? That's
Yeah.
also
Zonal tariffs help go a long way. I agree.
sorry, I interrupted you. Sorry.
No,
No,
not at all. I was giving the example of the fan club, and the fan club was a communication tool because there was no control. People decided themselves. We just showed them an app that showed the wind turbine turn, and they didn't have to go out and look. And then we started giving them 24, 48-hour forecast of when wind will be strong, so they can schedule their washing machines, they can schedule their cooking,
okay.
schedule things around that. And the use of the app, 78% of the users use the app regularly to look at what the forecast was. And you need to get to that level of interaction where electricity is actually cool. Electricity is interesting and people want to know about it, even though the savings aren't massive.
So 80% of the community use the app regularly to forecast their usage. That's incredible.
To look at our forecasts of wind generation,
And
so
therefore
they can
forecast their UK usage,
exactly.
right? Yeah, that's
I'll give
brilliant.
you another quick anecdote on that one. We're
Okay.
almost out of time. So we run events called saving sessions. We say to our Octopus says to their customers, tomorrow at 4 p.m. there's an event. We're going to be short of electricity. If you use less based on our forecast of your behavior, we will pay you. And that's been incredibly successful. 1.6 million people participated regularly over 2 winters in this. But we would typically give them 24-hour warning. We said we want to try quicker and we want to try 4 hours. So we used WhatsApp. We created a WhatsApp group where we push a message to customers, and those interested respond back and saying, I'm in, I'm going to do this.
This is
And the first time
brilliant.
we tried it, we had over 300,000 responses within 10 minutes. It almost crushed Kraken. It did not, but we weren't expecting it. But that's
Devrim,
the kind of response you get when
you've got
Ticketmaster,
customer trust. All right.
exactly, but
Okay.
that's the kind of response Ticketmaster gets when they announce a Katy Perry or Oasis concert. So it's like energy is the new rock star, thanks to good
Okay.
communication and engagement.
I wouldn't go that far, Devrim, but okay, I get your point. Devrim, such a pleasure hosting you. Thank you so much for stepping in. I look forward to doing more with Kraken and hopefully with Octopus as well next year. Thank you for your time, Kraken, and Devrim. Sorry.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
All right, see you again soon. Bye-bye.